This week we're going to explore the human development across the lifespan. And so the first place we start, of course, is progress before birth. And prenatal development really begins with the germinal stage lasting from conception to about 2 weeks. During this stage, we see a period of rapid cell development or cell division, and a mass of cell migrates to the uterus and begins to implant into the uterine wall, forming a placenta during the implantation process. The placenta is a structure that allows oxygen and nutrients to pass into the fetus from the mother's bloodstream and bodily waste to pass out to the mother. The embryonic stage begins or lasts from about 2 weeks to 2 months, and this is a period when the most vital organs and bodily systems such as the heart, the spine, and the brain emerge. The embryonic period is a time of great vulnerability. If anything interferes with development during this period, effects can be devastating. So, for example, maternal consumption of alcohol during this period can result in mild to very severe and profound fetal alcohol syndromes. The fetal period lasts from about 2 months to birth. During the early parts of the stage, muscles and bones begin to form, and the body continues to grow and function, with sex organs developing in the 3rd month and brain cells multiply during the final 3 months. Sometime between 22 and 26 weeks, the age of viability is reached, when the baby can survive if born prematurely. At 22 to 23 weeks, survival is very slim, but at 26 to 28 weeks, chances improve of survival rate, and those chances are about 85%. So let's examine the overview of fetal development that is figure 1.1 from our textbook. If we look at this, you can see that at the first weeks, we have the formation of the brain and differentiation in ovaries and testes. So we get the development of sex organs. By 12 weeks, you can see that the fetus can smile and frown, and now has a circulatory system that's working. At 16 weeks, there's a strong heartbeat, and the mother can feel movement. And by 20 weeks, you begin to see hair forming, hiccups in the fetus. For 24 weeks, visual and auditory senses are functional. Eyes begin to open. And by 28 weeks, body fat is added, and brain specialization is beginning to form. And body fat and brain specialization actually are synergistic. By 32 weeks, you have periods of sleep and wakefulness. By 36 weeks, rapid increase in weight gaining, immunity is forming from the mother, and of course by 38 weeks it's a full-term baby, and birth begins. So let's explore some environmental factors within the prenatal development. Developing a baby and its mother are linked through the placenta, and a mother's behaviors can affect a baby dramatically. Severe maternal malnutrition is linked to increase with risks of birth complications and neurological problems in the newborn. And moderate maternal malnutrition has also shown to have negative effects for many years after birth. Research links maternal malnutrition to vulnerability, schizophrenia, and other psychotic disorders in adolescence and in early adulthood. Maternal drug use can significantly impact the developing baby, even if the drugs are legal. So alcohol and cigarettes can have an impact. Alcohol has a profound impact. Cigarettes certainly has an impact, which is problematic, but obviously not as profound as alcohol. Many drugs, both both prescription and recreational, are linked to deficits and problems in terms of over-the-counter drug use, can also be present in impacting development. Fetal alcohol syndrome, again, is one of the leading causes of developmental cognitive issues. It's a collection of problems, congenital problems associated with excessive or, in some cases, mild alcohol use during pregnancy. These problems could include heart deficits, irritability, hyperactivity, brain damage, organic delay in motor and development functionings, and it's certainly FAS is linked to increases in depression, suicide, criminal, and at-risk behavior in adulthood. Many children actually don't meet the criteria for a diagnosis of FASD, but are still impaired due to a mother's drinking. We certainly would need to have a confirmation of drinking in order to make the diagnosis, and while the degree of impairment has shown to be related to the amount of alcohol consumed by a pregnant woman, current studies suggest that even normal social drinking can have enduring and negative impacts on children, including deficits in IQ, reaction time, motor skills, attention span, math skills, as well as impulsive, antisocial, and delinquent behavior. So maternal illness can also interfere with prenatal development. The nature of the damage, it depends in part on the mother's contracts to the what she contracts and what the illness is. Prenatal health begins very early in pregnancy with a focus and guidance by health professionals. Prenatal care can be associated with high survival rates and reduced prematurity, but many women, because of poverty and other problems, do not receive prenatal care. But prenatal development and prenatal period is a very significant and important part of the human development. So let's explore the wondrous years of childhood. Motor development refers to the progression of muscular coordination required for physical development. A basic number of principles are apparent in motor development. A cephalocaudal trend describes the fact that children tend to gain control over their upper parts of their bodies before the lower part. The proximodistal trend describes the fact that children gain control over their torsos before their extremities. Motor development depends on part by physical growth, as well as the process of maturation, the gradual unfolding of one's genetic blueprint, and the infant's ongoing exploration in interactions in the world. Development norms indicate what we call a median age at which individuals display various behaviors and abilities, and they are used for benchmarks only. We can see variations in this development in two children who are raised in the same conditions, or children who are all the same age, and that is perfectly acceptable. There are also cultural variations in motor development, and they indicate the importance of experience on the development of motor skills. Nonetheless, the similarities that we see across cultures outweigh these sort of differences, illustrating the importance of maturation and time. There are such things as easy and difficult babies, and differences in temperament, and psychology does explore longitudinal and cross-sectional designs and studies, and these compare groups of participants of differing age at different points in time, while longitudinal studies observe one group of participants repeatedly over time. Cross-sectional studies are easier, quicker, and cheaper, and longitudinal designs are more sensitive to the development of influences. However, Chess and Birch in 1970 were the first to begin longitudinal studies of temperament and individuals' characteristics of mood, activity level, and emotional reactivity was explored. And they found that temperamental individuality is established at about 2 to 3 months of age, and they identified 3 temperamental styles: easy, slow to warm up, and difficult. Easy babies were happy, regular in sleep and eating, and adaptable, and not easily or readily upset. Slow to warm up children were less cheery, less regular to sleep and eating, and slow adapting to change. And they had moderate reactivity, and difficult children were glum, erratic in sleep, and eat, resistant to change, and relatively irritable. And some children exhibited, of course, a mixture of all three styles. So following these, children over time indicated that difficult children developed more emotional problems than other children, and temperament was generally stable over time. And while Thomas and colleagues used parent reports, Jerome Keegan and colleagues relied on what we call direct observations, and they characterized infants along the uninhibited dimensions, with inhibited children exhibiting shyness, timidity, and wariness of the unfamiliar, and uninhibited children exhibiting less restraint with regard to the unfamiliar and less trepidation. Evidence suggests that these characteristics are stable over time as well and may have a genetic base. Current research shows that children who exhibit an inhibited temperament in their second year of life are more likely to develop problems with anxiety and during adolescence, which is quite interesting. So if you look at the figure 11.3 here, you can sort of see the difference between longitudinal versus cross-sectional research. Of course, longitudinal research will explore the same group of people or children over time, poking into where they're at over a certain period of time, whereas cross-sectional research can happen all at once, and one would explore a different group of children all at the same time in different age categories. Those are the two kinds of ways we can explore the development of children and adolescents or adult. In terms of early emotional development, we speak a lot about attachment, and attachment is a very significant and important part of human development. Attachment refers to the idea of close emotional bond of affection that develops between infants and their primary caregivers. It does not necessarily have to be a mother or a father, but the fact that their strong bond is developing is what's the most important part. Separation anxiety is emotional distress seen in many infants when they are separated from people with whom they have formed an attachment. Ainsworth in the 70s developed research paradigm to study attachment using separation anxiety as a measure. And she found that most infants have a secure attachment, playing and exploring comfortably when mom is present, becoming visibly upset when she leaves, and calming quickly when she returns. Some babies, however, show anxiety even when mom is near and protest excessively when she leaves, but are not particularly comforted when she returns, and Ainsley labeled this pattern anxious ambivalent attachment. And finally, some babies sought little contact with their mothers and were not distressed when she left, a pattern Ainsworth labeled as avoidant attachment. Evidence suggests for us that securely attached children tend to become resilient, they are competent toddlers, and have high self-esteem. And in preschool, as we explore these students, they show persistence, curiosity, self-reliance, and leadership. They also get along better with their peers. In middle childhood, they display better social and have richer friendship networks, and research actually also suggests that early attachment patterns set the tone for our adult romantic relationships. So what does that mean? It means that if we have good, healthy, strong attachments in our early years, then we can have healthy, strong attachments in our adult romantic relationships. There's a connection in terms of that. Factors affecting the development of attachment appear to be related to the quality of interactions between parent and or primary caregiver and child over a period of time. Bonding during the first few hours of birth does not appear to be crucial in terms of secure attachment, while much concern has focused on the effects of daycare on secure attachment. Recent research indicates that daycare is not harmful to children's attachment relationships, and there's evidence that they may be beneficial effects of daycare on social development in children who, for example, may come from deprived backgrounds. So while we look at cross-sectional research that shows that attachment is a universal feature of human development, cultural variations in child rearing can impact the patterns of attachment seen in a particular society. So for example, in Germanic culture, or Germany, Germans intentionally try to encourage independence, producing more of what Ainsworth would call avoidant attachments. Western researchers have demonstrated an ethnocentric slant to their investigation, and what represents a secure parent-child attachment may actually vary culturally. In terms of some of the most profound attachment research, John Bowlby, who originated the concept of attachment in the 1960s, assumed attachment to be a function of natural selection, with infants programmed to emit behaviors that trigger affectionate, protective responses from adults. And of course, if those don't happen, then problems ensue. Belsky in 99 asserts that children have been programmed by an evolution to respond to sensitive care with different types of attachment patterns. Erik Erikson in the 1960s proposed a theory of personality development based on stages of development, and many theories of development describe development in terms of stages or developmental periods during which characteristic patterns of behavior are exhibited and certain capacities become established. Stage theories assume that individuals must progress through specific stages in a particular order because each stage builds on the previous one. They also assume that progress through the stage is strongly related to age, and that development is marked by major discontinuities that bring about dramatic changes in behavior. Erikson theorized that there might be 8 stages spanning the lifespan in personality development, and he held that there is a specific psychosocial crisis during each stage, and the outcome of which determines the balance between opposing polarities in personality. The 8 stages in the theory are depicted here in the next slide, so let's look at them. So Erikson's stage theory is depicted here in figure 11.7, the 8 stages, the stage 1 being trust versus mistrust, stage 2 being autonomy or self-determination versus shame and doubt, stage 3 being taking initiative versus guilt, stage 4 industry versus inferiority, stage 5 identity versus confusion. Stage 6, intimacy versus isolation. Now you're into this early adulthood, thinking about sharing life with another. And in terms of stage 7, this generativity versus the self-absorption is something real value produced here in middle life, that midlife crisis period that people talk about. And of course, stage 8, this idea of integrity versus despair. And this is late adulthood, where the stage of development really here is asking questions about whether somebody has lived a full life. So take the time to pause here and really get a sense of what Erikson was proposing, and then continue on. So in terms of thinking and cognitive development, Jean Piaget made a landmark contribution to psychology's understanding of cognitive development, asserting that interaction with the environment and maturation gradually alter the way children think. This progression in thinking occurs through a complementary process of assimilation, which is the idea of interpreting new experience in terms of existing mental structures without changing them, and accommodation, which is changing existing mental structures to explain our new experiences. Piaget proposed that children's thought processes go through a series of 4 major stages, and these stages and age ranges associated with each are depicted on our next slide. These 4 stages, of course, are the sensoromotor, the pre-operational, the concrete operational, and the formal operational. With each stage, there are characteristic thinking and reasoning patterns as well as milestones in development. In the sensor-motor stage, for example, a child's progressively development in terms of object permanence, or the recognition that objects continue to exist even when they're no longer visible. And in the pre-operational stage, children engage in symbolic thought, the characteristic flaws in their reasoning, such as their centration, the tendency to focus on just one feature of a problem, and egocentrism are the limited ability to share another person's point of view, another's point of view, and this results in animism and the belief that all things are living just like oneself. So everything's focused on the way one thinks about things from their perspective. The concrete operational stage is characterized by the ability to perform operations with symbolic thought, such as reversing or mentally undoing an action. So thinking through something and undoing it in your mind. Children in the concrete operational stage are able to focus on more than one feature of a problem simultaneously, a process called decentration. And these new cognitive skills lead to conservation, or recognizing that amount of a substance does not change just because its appearance changed. So we'll look at an example of, for example, a narrow, tall glass versus a wide, short glass. The idea that the volume doesn't change in terms of the appearance. The formal operational period is marked by the ability to apply operational or abstract concepts such as the ideas of justice and love and the free will. And then again, let's look at Piaget's stages on the next slide. So as we explore this slide, you can see the development taking place, the stage 1 being the sensor motor period, which occurs from birth to about 2 years, and this is where coordination of sensory input and motor responses develop, and where we explore object performance, what they can do, how they are feeling in our hands and our mouths. And then the next stage would be the pre-operational period, and this is where really the development of symbolic thought occurs, marked by the idea of irreversibility, taking things away in your mind, and centration, and of course egocentrism, that the idea that thinking is really about what you see the world as at this age, and this lasts from 2 to 7 years. Stage 3 is the concrete operational period, where mental operations applied to concrete events take place, and mastery of conservation, and where thinking becomes classified by hierarchical rules and hierarchical classifications. And this occurs from 7 to 11 years, and as you can see depicted here, this is where a child really can start thinking about reversing forward, making rules, understanding what is happening in front of them and how others might be reacting. Chess is a good example of being able to start to play chess, whereas in stage 2, maybe the child is only able to play checkers. In stage 4, we have this formal operational period where mental operations are applied to abstract ideas, and logical and systematic thinking takes place, and this is from age through 11 through adulthood. So take the time to explore this slide and carry on when you are ready. This is an example of Piaget's conservation task in terms of understanding what is a pre-operational child will usually answer in terms of water, in contrast to a concrete operational period. And so in step 1, the child agrees that the beakers in A and B contain the same amount of water. You can see here, and they are the same size beakers. In step 2, the child absorbs as the water from beaker B is poured into beaker C, which is shaped differently. And of course, in step 3, the child is asked, do beakers A and C contain contain the same amount of water. Depending on the stage of development in Piaget's steps of development, the pre-operational child will answer correctly, stating that beaker C has more water, and a child in the concrete operational period tends to respond correctly, recognizing that water in the beaker C remains the same as beaker A. So a very famous Piagetian conservation task. And then, of course, if you take some time here, pause and explore slide 11.10, which is the gradual mastery of conservation that takes place over Piaget's age and stage of development, where you start to think about conservation of numbers, conservation of mass, length, and area, and other areas of development that take place in these stages. These critical periods in development are important. They limit the time span when it's optimal for certain capacities to emerge because of the organism's ability to respond to certain experiences. These are sensitive periods. These are evident in language development, in theory of mind, and if you think about for example, if you're working with young people with cognitive developmental or neurodevelopmental deficits, there is a very significant period of development that takes place upon which we want to ensure. So, for example, people with autism get early intervention and applied behavior analysis between the ages of 4 and 8. And this particular period of time is a very important period of time development for individuals to learn language skills development, and of course the theory of mind, the idea that others have a perspective that's different than yours. The development of moral reasoning occurs really in terms of understanding stage theory around this. Kohlberg devised a stage theory of moral development based on a subject's response to presented moral dilemmas. And Kohlberg was interested in a person's reasoning, not necessarily what their answer was. So he theorized that people progress through a series of 3 levels of moral development, each which can be broken into 2 sub-levels. So each stage represents a different way of thinking about right and wrong. And so these stages and characteristic reasoning patterns are associated with each are presented in the next slide, which are these 3 levels being the pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. So looking at figure 11.12, we can see Kohlberg's stage theory, and take some time here to explore the model, which posits 3 levels of moral reasoning, each of which can be divided into 2 stages. And you look at stage 1 being punishment orientated, stage 2 being naive reward orientation, and these being the post-conventional level. Stage 3 being good boy, bad boy, good girl orientation, where right and wrongs are determined by close others' approval or disapproval, and of course authority orientation, which is right and wrong, are determined by society's rules and laws, which should be obeyed, and these 2 stages being the conventional level, and stage 5 being social conflict orientation. Right and wrong is determined by society's rules, which are viewed and fallible rather than absolute. And stage 6, individual, principle, and conscious orientation, where right and wrong is determined by abstract ethical principles and emphasize equality and justice, and these 2 stages being the post-conventional level. So let's make the transition from childhood to adolescence, and we see some significant physical changes, and pubescence is really the term used to describe the 2-year span preceding puberty, during which changes leading to physical and sexual maturity take place. During this chill period, the children grow taller and heavier and develop secondary sex characteristics, physical features that distinguish one sex from another, but that are not essential for reproduction. reproduction. Puberty is a stage which sexual functions reach maturity, marking the beginning of adolescence. It's during puberty that the primary sex characteristics, the structures necessary for reproduction, develop fully. In females, the onset of puberty is signaled by menarche, which is the first occurrence of menstruation. In males, this is signaled by sperm production. Puberty is occurring at younger ages compared to previous generations, and explanations tend to include improvements in nutrition and medical care. Some theorists also hypothesize, for example, Belsky, that the quality of person's early family relationships may influence the onset of early puberty. And the timing of puberty varies, actually 10 to 15 years of age for girls, and typically between 11 and 16 for boys. And so girls tend to obviously mature before boys do. Studies of early matures versus late matures indicate that there are sex differences in the effects of early versus late maturation, which early maturing girls and late maturing boys having a greater risk of psychological problems and social difficulties. And so if we look at the physical development of puberty in slide 11.14, human hormonal changes really during this period lead to not only to the growth, but also to the development of the secondary sex characteristics. So you can take some time here to explore that development and then continue on when you're ready. In terms of identity, according to Erickson, the key challenge of adolescence is to form a clear sense of identity, and this is really important during this period. James Marcia asserts that the presence or absence of crisis and commitment during the identity formation stage can combine in various ways to produce 4 different identity statuses. Foreclosure is the premature commitment to a role prescribed by one's parents. A moratorium involves delaying commitment and engaging in experimentation with different roles. Identity diffusion is a state of lack of direction or apathy where a person does not confront or challenge and commit to an ideology. And identity achievement involves arriving at a sense of self and direction after some consideration of alternative possibilities, playing with alternative possibilities, and then getting to the idea of identity achievement. So you can look at figure 11.17 here to get a sense of the psychologist James Marcia's occurrence of identity crisis and exploration of development of personal commitments. And these can combine into 4 possible statuses as shown in this diagram. As we move from adolescence very quickly, by the way, to adulthood, we really look at personality being marked by both stability and changes, as adult is a period of many, many transitions. And so adults who successfully work through Erickson's stage of development, intimacy, generativity, and integrity, and many landmarks in adult development involve transitions in family relationships, marriage, parenthood, parent-adolescent relationships, and of course the empty nest syndrome, which, by the way, me and my late stage of development, I am at the beginning of an empty nest, I wouldn't say syndrome, where I have my wife and I living at home, and both of our children have now just moved out, my daughter being at university and my son living on his own. Studies of marriage and marital satisfaction indicate that when spouses have differing role expectations, adjustment to marriage is more difficult. Research also shows that high rates of marital satisfaction at the beginning and each of family cycle. So research shows that adjustment to parenthood proceeds more smoothly if unrealistic expectations are not held. So research on later parent-child relationships should suggest that parent-adolescent relationships and the adjustment difficulties that parents may have when children leave home, like empty nest syndrome, may not be as stressful as once believed. And you may hear that from folks when then everybody leaves the family. It's stressful, but I can tell you from my perspective, and of course we have two fantastic children who we would love having here anytime. They have left home and we are very happy about it. The vocational development tends to proceed through stages of exploration of careers and establishment of career and maintenance and decline. So that's sort of what happens in adulthood. You get this development of career, exploration, establishment, and then of course you maintain your career and decline in terms of when it's time to stop working. Age-related physical changes occur and tend to proceed through stages of exploration of career, tend to appear in terms of stages nutrition loss, sensory loss, and hormonal changes occurring over a period of time. And research indicates that menopause is not actually as problematic as it once thought as well. And perhaps for, again, reasons of people being healthier, there being alternative options for people to keep themselves well and work through those hormonal changes. In terms of cognitive functioning, research indicates that general mental ability remains fairly stable with small declines in IQ after age of 60. And fluid intelligence is more likely to decline with age, while we call crystallized intelligence remains stable and or increases. Mental speed declines in late adulthood, and memory losses have been reported in many studies. These are moderate and variable. So as we've explored sort of human development across the lifespan in terms of the different stages, childhood, we are very interested in the development of the child's moral and or physical abilities in psychology, and stage development is really important to help us understand that. In adolescence, of course, we're interested in development of person and moral and ethical reasoning as well, but also physical changes occur. And in adulthood, life experiences and life development leads to a period of time in late adulthood where one sees mental speed declining in late adulthood, memory losses happening, and of course, and seeing disorders within late adulthood being very significant now, knowing that I don't think any of us don't know somebody who knows somebody whose late adult life is impacted by late adult diseases like Alzheimer's and memory losses and cognitive losses as well. So that, in a nutshell, is the lifespan development that psychology is interested in. Of course, the subject of each of these areas I introduced are vast and very much more intensely developed and researched than explained here. But in psychology, intro to psychology, you get this overall development. And then, of course, as you move on in psychology, you can focus on aspects of each of these areas.